Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a question that sounds so simple you'd think the answer is obvious. But it's got a twist that sparked a major debate thousands of years ago, and, it might just flip the way you think about happiness on its head.
So, let's get right to it. How many basic kinds of feelings can we actually have? Is it just two, pleasant and painful? Or is it three, pleasant, painful, and kind of neutral? This isn't just some philosophical game. The answer to this cracks open a really profound teaching about what happiness even is. And it all kicked off with two friends, a pretty heated argument, and having to go to a higher authority to settle.
All right, so let's set the scene. This story comes from ancient Buddhist texts, and you've got two main guys. There's a chamberlain named Panchakanga and a venerable monk, Udayi. One day, Panchakanga just walks up to Udayi and asks him what seems like a super straightforward question. Hey, how many feelings did the Buddha actually talk about?
And here's where it gets fun, because both of them were totally convinced they had the right answer. Udayi says, confidently, the Buddha spoke of three feelings, pleasant, painful, and neutral. Simple enough. But Panchakanga immediately shuts him down. He goes, no, that's not right. The Buddha spoke of only two feelings, pleasant and painful. And his whole argument was that this neutral feeling we talk about, well, it's actually a really subtle, peaceful kind of pleasure.
And they were just stuck, completely at an impasse. They go back and forth on this 3 times, but nobody's budging. Udayi is dug in on 3. Panchakanga is dead set on 2. And get this, both of them were absolutely positive. They were the one correctly remembering what the Buddha taught.
So naturally, word of this argument makes its way up to the Buddha himself. His close attendant, Ananda, tells him the whole story. And I'm sure everyone was on the edge of their seat, waiting for the Buddha to just pick a side. Is it 2 or is it 3? But what he said next, nobody saw it coming.
After listening to the whole story, the Buddha just drops this bombshell. He says that Udayi's explanation, the one with 3 feelings, was totally correct. And that Panchakanga's explanation, the one with 2 feelings, was also totally correct. I mean, wait, what? How can they both be right? This is where things get really interesting and the real lesson starts to unfold.
The Buddha then pulls back the curtain. He says the right answer all depends on the way you're looking at it. He'd actually talked about feelings in many different ways for different reasons. Sometimes he said there were 2, sometimes 3, and other times 5, 6, 18, 36, and he even mentions 108 different kinds of feelings. The point wasn't the number. The point was that getting stuck on one single answer leads to arguments. But if you can see things from different angles, you find harmony.
So to help them understand this, the Buddha starts to lay out this kind of map of happiness. And he begins with the one type of happiness that pretty much everyone knows and recognizes. He has to set a baseline first before he can take us into these deeper, more subtle ideas.
He calls this sensual pleasure. It's the good stuff we get from our 5 senses. Seeing beautiful things, hearing great music, eating delicious food. That's our ground floor. It's real, it's a totally valid kind of pleasure. But then he says, some people think this is it, that this is the highest pleasure you can get. And to that, the Buddha says, I don't grant them that.
And this is where he starts building what you can think of as a ladder of happiness. He's literally about to walk us up rung by rung into states of pleasure and happiness that are way more profound, way more refined than just what our senses can give us.
And he does this with this really powerful repeating line. He sets up sensual pleasure as the first step, but then says there's something better, because there is another pleasure that is finer than that. This line is like a drumbeat, guiding us higher and higher.
So here's how this ladder looks. After that baseline of sensual pleasure, you get the bliss that comes from deep meditation, a kind of rapture you can only find in seclusion. Even higher than that is a state of pure equanimity, just being fully present with mindful awareness. And then you go even further, beyond normal consciousness, to states like perceiving infinite space or even nothingness. And with each step, he says, it's finer than the last.
And just when you think, okay, we have to be at the top now, right? A state of consciousness called nothingness seems like the absolute peak. He says it again. Even beyond this incredibly profound state, there is still another pleasure that is finer.
And this brings us to the very, very top of the ladder, the final rung.
And honestly, it is a complete paradox. It's the most mind-bending idea in the whole teaching, and it's the one that forces us to really rethink what happiness is all about.
So here it is, the final rung, the most radical idea of them all. The highest, finest pleasure, according to this teaching, is the complete stopping of perception and feeling. Let that sink in for a second. The greatest happiness is a state where you don't actually perceive or feel anything in the way we usually think about it. That's wild.
Now, you're probably thinking exactly what the text anticipates. The Buddha himself knows that people are going to hear this and go, wait a minute, you're saying the end of all feeling is happiness? What's up with that? It seems to go against the very definition of pleasure. But here's the key that unlocks the whole thing. The Buddha explains that when he talks about happiness, he isn't just talking about a pleasant feeling. His definition's way broader. He includes pleasure and happiness wherever you can find it, in any context. This means happiness can be that deep, deep peace that comes from the absence of disturbance. It's the ultimate release, not just a feeling of joy.
So, we've climbed this whole ladder. Where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway from this ancient argument and its really surprising answer? Well, it basically asks us to hit the reset button on how we define happiness for ourselves. The big lesson here is pretty clear. Happiness isn't just one thing. It's a whole spectrum, from the joy you get from your senses all the way to a very subtle kind of peace. It can be a feeling, for sure, but it can also be a state of being. Remember Panchakonga and Udayi? They were arguing because they were each holding just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The real wisdom is realizing you need a flexible mind to see the whole picture.
And that leaves us with a pretty deep question to think about. If the highest form of happiness is a kind of peace so profound it actually goes beyond feeling, what does that suggest we should really be looking for in our own lives? What ladder are we trying to climb? Thanks for watching.